This is The Last Laugh. I'm Matt Wilstein from The Daily Beast, and my guest today is a writer who started out at The Onion and has written for HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver and Succession. His new movie, Bugonia, stars Jesse Plemons as a disaffected loner who kidnaps a high-powered CEO played by Emma Stone because he believes she's an alien. Will Tracy, welcome to The Last Laugh.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. The second I saw this movie, Bugonia, I wanted to do an episode about it. I wanted to just talk to, anyone involved in it. And I feel like you are the perfect person, especially with your comedy background, as I just laid out. But definitely want to start with the movie. I was really blown away by this film and how relevant it felt to our current cultural, political moment. It wasn't until after I saw it that I realized it was based on a Korean movie, Save the Green Planet, that came out more than 20 years ago. So I thought we could kind of start there. How did you end up adapting this story, and how does it become so relevant to where we are now?
Yeah, I hadn't seen Save the Green Planet or even heard of it. I had lunch with my friend Ari Aster, and he's one of the producers of the film in New York. And he had told me that there's this movie that I think he had already maybe kind of worked out. He talked to CJ Entertainment, the Korean company who produced the original film. They produced Parasite. They produced a lot of big Korean films. And I think maybe he had already worked out some rights to it, but he didn't really tell me anything about it. He just said, you might find something in the premise. I think he'd already, maybe having known my work on Succession and read the script for the menu, he felt like I might find something in there. Anyway, so he sent me a little Vimeo link, a very janky Vimeo link to the original film. I watched it on my laptop, just the one time, and kind of took some notes. The movie announces its premise pretty immediately, so I think I saw just in the premise, which I didn't know, what he meant, that there was something that could be something in that premise that felt like it could be adapted to a contemporary American context, and kind of you could create a whole new movie out of it. That was, as you said, maybe relevant in ways that the original film could not have foreseen, being Korean and being from 20 years ago. So that was basically how it started. I just watched the movie the one time. I still have only seen it the one time. I didn't want it kind of in my head while I was writing, maybe out of fairness to both movies. I just didn't want to feel like I had to be, essentially quoting the original chapter and verse. I just kind of wanted to feather my own nest completely and start fresh as much as I could, obviously using the premise and using a number of the kind of story beats.
And then how did it end up with Yorgos Lanthimos directing, who it does feel like it's a really perfect marriage of subject and director for him as well. So was that someone that you met through Ari Aster?
I agree. It is a perfect kind of marriage, but not an arranged marriage. I mean, I certainly didn't write the script with him in mind, and I didn't know that he was attached. And even at no point in the first kind of, I think even year and a half of that script being an existing document did Yorgos Lanthimos' name ever come up. And again, I want to stress, I wrote this about 5 years ago, and it was still another year and change after that. I should get these dates. I should know these dates, but it was still a while after it was written that we finally sent it to Yorgos. And for a while, I just thought, this script just kind of started in a funny way, and it's been a while, and I just kind of figured it wasn't going to happen. But then Ari sent it to Yorgos, and I think Yorgos read it that week and said yes that week.
Wow. Talking about sort of the premise and the content of the film, it does feel to me like it has so much to say about online culture, these sort of, as I said, disaffected young men and how they, get information and act on it. How much of that was on your mind writing it? And did you have to sort of engage with any of that stuff to get inside the head of a character like Teddy, the Jesse Plemons character?
Yeah, it was definitely on my mind. Some of it was unavoidably on my mind because I wrote it in April of 2020 in New York. So first wave of COVID lockdown in New York, which was really locked down. I had COVID for part of the time that I was writing it for the first time. We had just had a baby, so we were really locked down. And so I was pretty freaked out, pretty stir crazy, pretty isolated feeling at that moment. And most of my information and most of my interaction was all kind of happening virtually and in a kind of, in some ways it felt like a kind of simulated version of reality or at least a very detached version of reality. And I was confused and I didn't know what the official story was. The official story kept kind of changing a bit. And so, yeah, I guess in that probably it must have, I don't think I was aware of it at the time, but I think that must have atmospherically in some way bled into this story of someone who, is kind of creating their own story because they don't believe the story they've been told and they're isolated and atomized. And that probably worked its way into it. In terms of like trying to write a representation of, the kind of the disaffected, alienated young American male, or the incel male, or I think I which you didn't say those words, I'm saying those words. I think I was trying to probably studiously trying to avoid that a little bit. I think I was trying and as much as I could to access a kind of a real empathy for Teddy to understand it, and not to like categorize him as being politically or even culturally a thing that we necessarily recognize. I didn't want him to be a crazy incel. I didn't want him to be kind of right wing or even recognizably of any sort of political stripe. I think I wanted him to be a guy who kind of went through all that stuff and didn't find what he was looking for. And so he kind of had to make his own world, create his own reality, of which, by the way, he's not entirely wrong about everything, right? I also wanted that to be clear, too, that he has a few points.
Yeah, you have that moment where he talks about how he kind of explored, alt-right and ultra-left and all these different ideologies. And it did remind me of, this now when this is a different kind of story, but when there's a, mass shooter or a, assassination attempts, like we've seen, there's this rush to identify the political.
Here's the box we're going to put them in. And then actually we realize that, they're in like 5 different very weird boxes that don't go together at all. And it's impossible to make any coherent sense out of this person because like most people, they're not fully coherent in what they think and believe, right?
So I don't know how much you were involved in casting as the writer, but I think you lucked out in a major way here by getting probably 2 of the best actors of their generation, Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons, in your 2 lead roles. I mean, they are unbelievable in this film. Talking about, I found out reading about it that the character Michelle in this film was not a woman in the original Korean film, right? It was a male character.
Yeah, kind of an older male. Yeah.
And so that was obviously a big decision that you made. Was that made with Emma Stone in mind, or was that made before she was cast, or how did that?
No,
how did you come to that?
Yeah, that was all kind of in the first draft of the script, long before Yorgos and Emma came aboard. As soon as I knew that Yorgos was wanting to make the film, I had a fairly good idea of who he was thinking of for his female lead. The only difference, I suppose, between Emma as a person and the person that I wrote in the script was that I think I'd written the originally I'd written the character as being a slightly older, maybe someone in their mid-50s, possibly even 60 or older. Oh, wow. Someone who could maybe be Jesse's character's mom's age, Right. But then, when Emma came aboard, I had to kind of reshape that slightly, but actually kind of discovered I didn't have to reshape it much because, maybe I had in mind a certain kind of CEO, like Mary Barra was who I had in mind, right? The car industry CEO.
Right.
And realizing that, well, actually, Emma's character, Michelle, she's kind of like a biomedical kind of techie kind of CEO, and a lot of those people in reality are a bit younger. Your Holmeses and your Zuckerbergs, and so it was quite a natural and more realistic and believable switch. And then Jesse was just, I was quite worried about that role before. When we were talking about casting before Yorgos came on board, because I thought, well, there's plenty of actors. Surely there's plenty of young men who are going to be perfect for this. And then the more I try to think of who that could be, someone who could be quite menacing and scary, but also kind of sweet, and could kind of become like a little boy on a turn like that on a dime, and could be and has the comic chops too, but the subtle comedic chops. They're not going to go, ooh, comedy, and they're going to go too big with it, which are some actors who are not as experienced with comedy. They're really eager to prove, oh, I can be funny. And so they go for the laugh too much. And Jesse just is none of those things. He's just the most honest. I can't think of a dishonest performance he's given, right? He plays it so straight and with such a reality, and he can be very scary. He can be very, very sweet and disarming, and he can kind of play guilty and innocent, and he's great, and so he was just the perfect, both of them. Yeah. I mean, as you said, I was just enormously lucky.
And then there's the character of Don, who's, Jesse Plemons' character's sort of sidekick cousin, which could be a very tricky role as well. And you ended up with this actor, Aidan Elbis, who's fantastic.
Amazing. Yeah, that was and it's
his first movie role, right?
First movie ever, and he spends most of the movie locked in a basement with, like, as you said, like the two finest actors of their generation. And so
that can't be easy.
You never felt like, get him out of the basement. What's this guy doing? You're so drawn to him, and he ends up being sort of the heart and soul of the movie. I felt he was sort of the heart and soul of the set when we were shooting the movie. And yeah, first time performer. I had kind of written the character non-specifically, but felt like, maybe, there was something about the character, at least in the way I wrote it. I guess maybe I started with Dog Day Afternoon, a little bit, that dynamic between Pacino and Cazale in that movie, and then kind of went my own way with it from there. Is thinking about Don as someone who's not so much interested in saving the world as he is with saving Teddy. And he's sort of the emotional intelligence who kind of sees what no one else in the movie can see, or at least sees it before they do. And I'd written the character. The more I kind of worked on the script, he kind of became slightly, without being specific about it, there was something somewhat neurodivergent maybe about him. And then Jennifer Venditti, the casting director for the film, who's amazing at finding kind of, non-actors basically, or people who are or kind of first-time actors, or she's just great at that in particular. And she found Aidan, who he identifies as autistic, and it maybe took, once he signed on, just to make I maybe did a little bit of work around the script, not changing the kind of emotional essence of the character at all, but just kind of to make some of the lines a bit more straightforward, or a bit more kind of in Aidan's cadence, which is a particular cadence, and just so that he would feel more comfortable as a first-time actor in some of those scenes. And having a scene partner, much of his scenes are with Jesse, who was just, he's just, it's the kind of ideal, probably first-time actor's scene partner. I mean, he's just he's so helpful and empathetic in his own way. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I love Aidan. I love his performance in the movie.
And then the last casting decision that was a total curveball is Stavros Halkias, the comedian, as the police officer. I was listening to him talk about being in this movie, and I would say even he seems confused about why he was cast in the role.
He said to me, the first day on set, because I had been a big fan of his, but I had nothing to do with his casting.
Yeah.
But he said he was fairly certain that, like, Yorgos just looked for the most Greek-sounding name of every actor who was currently working, and just cast the most Greek-sounding person.
It's just pure bias. Yeah.
But that is not true. I think I think that Yorgos saw what you see in the movie, which he's really quite a deft and interesting actor, right? And he's not afraid to play to play a quite disgusting character, but to play a quite disgusting character with a strange kind of restraint and even warmth. Like there's remains something kind of likable and compelling about the guy, even though he's not. The character is not likable and compelling. He's great, and it's been also quite a, nice experience becoming friendly with him as well.
Yeah, I love how he just is like constantly apologizing for doing the most basic police work.
That's right. Exactly.
It's a great detail. I find this movie so funny. Reading reviews of it, and I've seen the word bleak get tossed around a lot. To me, it wasn't that. It was I was laughing throughout the movie. But how do you think about that? Because I think it's something that's run through a lot of your work, is finding the right tone, putting comedy in some sort of more dramatic places, or it seems like that's something that you're interested in. So how do you think about that when you're writing?
Yeah, it's weirdly, I don't think about it much when I'm writing. In other words, I don't think about it like in a programmatic way where I'm a quarter of the way into a scene, I realize, there hasn't been a joke yet. Let me put some comedy here. And where's the comedy dial at in this scene? And maybe we should pump up the drama. But I'm not adjusting the dials at all. I'm just writing it. Maybe the situations that I write are inherently extreme or heightened and or tense in a way that kind of makes you laugh a little bit, because I try to write the characters within those scenes to react in what I hopefully feel is like contradictory or hypocritical or self-justifying ways that are, it's funny to watch them squirm and justify themselves within these very extreme situations and take them very seriously. And so, but I'm just honestly, all those scenes is just me I wasn't even trying to write jokes. I was just trying to write how I thought those characters realistically would behave in these situations, which maybe are inherently absurd. And that's really all I'm thinking about. I think every time I write a script now, I come from a comedy writing background. And so I think when I write scripts now, I always think like, finally, I've written something that's not a comedy, which is kind of how I felt when I wrote this. And then I kind of read it through and I realize, I guess it is. I guess it is kind of a comedy. But hopefully it's kind of a few things at once. And again, I've watched it with some audiences where they really watch it as a kind of a tense thriller, and as you said, kind of a bleak or sad experience. Which I'm not going to tell anyone how to watch the movie. I've never found it to be. Even the very ending, I don't find to be, my interpretation of it is not a bleak one, but everyone's entitled to their own interpretation.
Well, I want to talk about the ending. I will say that Emma Stone was just on Colbert's show declaring that it's a comedy. So according to her, your film is a comedy.
No, I guess I have to admit that it is. Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm excited to tell you about Inside Trump's Head, a new podcast from The Daily Beast, hosted by Trump biographer Michael Wolff and the Beast's resident provocateur, Joanna Coles. 3 times a week, Michael and Joanna unpack what's really going on inside the mind of the world's most unpredictable man, Donald Trump, bringing you unflinching access and insight you won't find anywhere else. If you've ever wondered what the hell is Trump thinking, and who hasn't, you don't want to miss these conversations. Subscribe for new episodes every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on YouTube, and the next day on your favorite podcast platforms. The ending, I think, could be described as bleak in some ways.
Sure.
I don't, for anyone who has not seen the movie yet and doesn't want it spoiled for them, I encourage you to skip ahead a few minutes, but I do want to talk to you about the ending. I was quite proud of myself watching the movie that it at least occurred to me that it was a possibility that Emma Stone's character really was an alien and that's where we were headed. But I think it was still it's a pretty shocking ending. There are about 100 articles across the internet right now, that are like Bugonia's bonkers ending explained. But I figured since I have you here, maybe I'll go to you. How would you, describe the ending, or how did you know that that's how you wanted to end the movie?
Yeah, I think I wanted to end the movie, hopefully ambiguously enough that people could leave the theater and have this exact conversation. Like, what is the ending? And I don't think there's anyone. I certainly wouldn't write in the article or endorse in the article saying here is the explanation, because I think the idea is to have various valid interpretations. I did want kind of an ending where you kind of see a planet without us and what that looks like, and yet you also see a planet still with us, because there we are in those tableau at the end, and so you also get a little glimpse of like, oh, here's what we're missing. All the kind of the funny, weird, banal, idiosyncratic, warm but also cold bits of who we are, and hopefully that kind of panoply of a little bit of a kind of a panoply of the human experience that you see at the end of the movie is a reminder of everything that we'd be missing without us, for good and for ill. And to me, I this is just maybe my interpretation. I think the bleak interpretation is perfectly valid, and some people also find the ending hopeful in that, oh, the planet will be much better off without us. That's another hopeful way of looking at the ending if you're not so faithful to the human biological imperative. But for me, I see, to me, a bleak ending is when you show the world, try to present the world at the end of a film as it really is, and say, that's how the world is, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's the bleak ending. The ending of this film, we're seeing something that hasn't happened, and I'm 99.999% certain will never happen. Mm-hmm. And so it's just really giving you a look at like, okay, what would we be missing without us? What do we want? How can we be better? That's another way of looking at the end. How can we understand each other and also see what we look like when we're not yelling at each other? That to me was more what I had in mind when I was writing it, and by being so abstract and hypothetical, it's by definition to me it's not really bleak. Yeah.
Did you consider other endings? Were there alternate ideas in terms of how it could end, and whether Teddy was going to be right or wrong about his theory?
No, I never, and it's a big, I've been asked that before, and it's a big swing, that ending. And so it's the kind of thing where, like, if you could end up in the editing room looking at it and saying, boy, it's a big swing. I wish we kind of had a few other swings in the old swing bag, but we didn't shoot any other ones. Maybe we should have. But no, I mean, I think that, trusting in Yorgos' ability and the actor's ability to execute that ending, I have felt that I often find endings somewhat easy to write because I've outlined the script to begin with. The beginning to me is the hard part. You have to get the car started and and introduce the world, the characters, and the tone to the audience. What is this movie going to feel like? And that's very hard. I end up rewriting beginnings over and over and over again. The ending, if you've done your job correctly and you've written the characters correctly, and then the ending is sort of like the only place where the car can go. That's like the only place it could go. Any other direction wouldn't make sense emotionally. And so I felt that was the only way to do it. I mean, I guess you could have had an ending where she is just a run-of-the-mill CEO who did a really good job of fooling a guy, and she's let free. I mean, and that might say something about our culture and our politics, but I think the ending we have, it's a little bit of this. The scope widens a bit of what we're saying and what the movie can be about a bit. I always think about the ending of Altman's Nashville, where you pull out and you get the full stage with the American flag, and you kind of okay, this suddenly became a movie that's bigger than its sort of Nashville subculture that we thought it was about. It's sort of about something bigger, and that might be a possible way to look at the ending of this film. Not to compare myself to Robert fucking Altman. Sorry about that. Yeah.
I'd love to go back and talk a little bit about your, how you got to this point and earlier part of your career. you started at the Onion as sort of that was your first professional writing job. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, I was a, yeah, I think it was my first writing job. So had been a editorial assistant at Random House Books in the reference books division, which sounds actually, yeah, exactly. It's even less fascinating than it sounds because it wasn't even like encyclopedias or something. It was, those little price guides to like baseball cards and stamps and shit. It was like editing the new edition of that, which is all they do is change this is now worth $1.99 instead of $1.89.
Yeah.
And
that
so
sounds mind-numbing.
It was quite brutal, and it was actually kind of a three strikes thing. Not in terms of I wasn't doing anything bad at work. I just wasn't. I showed a complete lack of interest in the job, and I kind of a few meetings where someone said, there are people who want this. It's a good job, good benefits, and I kind of said, I know, I want it. I definitely want it. And then by the third time of me just clearly like dragging my heels and not wanting to be there, they said, I think it's time we ended this relationship. And so then I was casting about for something, and I saw that the Onion, I saw on Craigslist, which is where they used to post a lot of jobs. I saw that they were looking for an intern. So I was an intern at the Onion for, whatever that was, a couple months. And, the way it used to work at the Onion is at the end of your internship, they'll sort of let you submit like a list of headlines that they'll read in the next staff meeting. Jokes, basically submit jokes. And so I did that, and they liked some of them. Then I kind of regularly submitted headlines for a while, and then I was starting to get a lot in. And so then they asked me to, on a freelance basis, to write a few stories that got in. I wish I could remember any of these headlines or stories. It would be a much more interesting interview, but I can't remember them. I'm really bad at this.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of thing where you write so many that they probably all go out of your head.
That's absolutely. And I kind of remember everyone else's but mine. But and then basically what I learned was that they were kind of trying me out and priming me to hire me, but there was no space at the moment to hire me. So as soon as someone left, Mike DeCenzo was one of the writers that went on to write for, he was like kind of one of the main Fallon writers for, he writes for SNL now. And so I kind of filled his spot, and then kind of, worked my way up a little bit, and then was eventually, for my last couple of years there, I was editor-in-chief, and we were in Chicago at that time. So, no, I mean, it was hugely informative, big thing. I still sometimes in my head when I'm writing something think like, okay, if I pitched this to the Onion Room in 2009, how would this go over? There's still kind of, you carry those people around in your head a little bit.
Is that still the toughest?
Especially with comedy, right? Because sometimes it's hard to know, like, when you're just writing comedy in your own head, sometimes it's difficult to know, is this funny? Unless you have one other person there. And if there's really not someone physically in the room, you kind of just have to remember the senses of humor of everyone that you worked with at a different job, and then think, well, Dan Guterman likes this kind of thing. If I pitch this to him, would I be nervous to pitch this because I think he'd think it was bad, or would I think this is right in the sweet spot? So, you do think that stuff. Yeah.
Was that the toughest room that you've pitched to, the Onion?
Toughest? Yeah, I mean, in terms of like, tough in its own way. I mean, there's such a war of attrition at that show, right? Because there's so many at that paper, I should say, because there's so many headlines, that get read every week, and only a certain percentage of them would get picked. But then they're just on a sort of a shorter list, and then that shorter list is whittled down even further. And so, you're the chances of getting something, especially a full story into the paper that week was always tough, But, I just had been such a fan of the Onion, and I felt like I knew the room so well, and I knew those people so well that, I felt I could do it after a while. Succession Room was probably difficult in its own way. But, that's a story room. It's a little bit different, right? It's sort of everybody's a little bit kind of just fuck, and just trying to think of a way through. And it's changing so much, even up to a few days before you shoot something, and the scripts are constantly being rewritten. So, but, that I just, yeah, they were both kind of difficult. Probably the most difficult in a way was when I wrote for John Oliver, because I just was completely, I was there from the very first show.
Oh, wow.
And then I was there for I guess the first 3 or 4 years of that show. And from the get-go, I always felt like, what am I doing here? Like every week I had to write a piece for that show. And it's a good show, and I wasn't mistreated, but every week I had to write a piece for that show. I felt like I was back in 9th grade and I had like geometry homework, and I was like, I don't know the answer. Fuck, I don't know how to do this.
Because because it's such a sort of intellectual project, or why did it feel that way?
Because it didn't feel fun to me. First of all, it felt like homework. And also it was just you had to kind of very quickly acquaint yourself with and have an opinion about something that you've never heard of. So, this week we're talking about civil forfeiture laws. I don't know what those words mean. They sound bad, I think. Yeah. And then so you'd have to acquaint yourself enough with it quickly. You had to cram for the test, basically, and figure out as much as you can to have, first of all, an opinion that is going to be, when we put it out into the world is not going to say, oh, you guys didn't do enough homework on this. You're completely wrong. This is a very wrong-headed take. You had to be kind of right. And then you had to present the story coherently. And then somehow on top of that, there had to be jokes. You had to make the jokes funny. And then as soon as that was done, you're on to the next week. And it's, this week it's municipal violations. And I've never heard of that either. So it was just always felt a little bit tough. And I think also maybe just the format of a guy, very funny and talented guy, but a guy at a desk looking into the camera and saying what he believes with some jokes, but also kind of really saying, here's what I think. And here's the moral stand I'm taking on it. It just didn't interest me as a writer. I think I wanted to write stories and characters and people who were who didn't have to be correct.
Well, yeah, that's a good transition to Succession, which is a show where not many people are correct. Was that hard to make the jump from a show like Last Week Tonight to something like Succession, because they're so different?
It was hard to get the gig. It was hard to tell my agent at the time, who's still my agent, it's hard to tell my agent, you know how it worked for The Onion, and then I did the thing that Onion writers do, where you jump to a late night comedy show, and now I've been doing that for 4 years. Yeah, I think I wanted to write for a 1 hour drama show. Because Succession was not on the horizon at that point. I just knew I didn't want to write for another late night show. I didn't have a movie script that I had written yet, and there was no sitcom I wanted to write for at the time. And so I thought, well, I just kind of want to do something a little bit different. And I thought, well, what about a 1 hour show? And there are a lot of 1 hour shows, the best ones, I think, Sopranos and or even something like Breaking Bad. They're funny, right? So this comedy, that was becoming a little bit more of that was starting to happen. It's a drama, but it's actually kind of funny. That was becoming a thing around that time. But nevertheless, most drama shows at that time, they really weren't looking for like a late night comedy writer, a Daily Show adjacent show type writer. They were looking for hardcore TV writers, drama writers, or playwrights. That's what they wanted. And it just so happened that Succession came along, which was a 1 hour drama show created by a comedy writer. And he had brought, most people he'd hired for the show were his comedy writing, Tony Roach and John Brown and Georgia Pritchard, people like that who he'd worked with on Peep Show and The Thick of It in the UK. And he, I think, because HBO didn't really know him and didn't really know these writers that he was bringing, these comedy writers he was bringing from England, I think they were trying to prevail upon him early on that, you should get some drama people in the room, because it is a drama, right, Jesse? And you should get some playwrights in there. And I think he did that with some success, but I think he really found that what he really wanted actually was comedy writers. I think I've always had this theory, at least, that it is a little bit maybe easier for comedy writers to try and take a stab at drama than it is for hardcore drama writers to try to write jokes.
Yeah, I could imagine that for sure.
It's a little bit hard because a lot of what comedy writers do is sort of satirizing or sometimes even parodying a dramatic form. And so you kind of know, and also you know a bit about tension and release and surprise. And so that's just kind of what he was looking for on that show. And the brief that he had was he wanted American, because he had mainly English people. He wanted someone who was a comedy writer and someone who knew about American politics and media. So I just happened to fit the bill. I don't think he'd seen John Oliver, but I think he mainly thought, an Onion guy. That's exactly it.
I was wondering if you had to kind of, pretend like you really knew all that John Oliver stuff when you...
Yeah. No, I mean, he thinks about... Jesse probably approaches a lot of this stuff the same way he's the smartest man alive, but I think as a writer, I think he approaches things the same way I do, which is, you fill your head with this research, but then... you take a while thinking about it, pondering it, and try to come up with, what you want to say about. But then at a certain point when you sit down to write, you do kind of have to push the research out of your head, and you just have to start writing and creating your world, because you're creating a world, right? You're not creating a research document. You're not doing a 60 Minutes piece. It's a story with characters. So, he kind of had but it ended up being that, probably my research approach, getting used to doing all that research on Last Week Tonight, and even to a certain extent The Onion, I think did come in handy. I think he found that useful in me from the get-go, that I did sort of, even if just by sort of osmosis, by being in so many rooms where it was being talked about, I did kind of know more than a lot of those English comedy writers did about the Electoral College. I just did, and I knew a bit more about American media, having lived in New York and worked for a kind of media company. And, I was a fact checker at Vanity Fair, and I just knew people in that world a little bit. And so I think they found me probably useful.
Did you find yourself gravitating towards certain characters or writing, connecting with certain characters on that show, or feeling like you understood them more than others? Or?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you have to write sort of all of them, but I found probably, comedically, I did have a lot of maybe success writing stuff for Roman. But my favorite character, it's somewhat obvious to say, well, maybe in some ways he's sort of like the main character of the show, but he's not necessarily talked about as a lot of people's favorite character, but he's my favorite. I love Kendall. I love to write Kendall. I love to write he's someone who's trying so hard to present a version of himself to the world, and it's fun to write somebody who thinks that the version is presented to the world, that the world is sort of buying it, but they're not really. And I really enjoyed writing the sadness of that character, and also I felt the kind of the kind of sickening comedy of that character, just their inability to get out of their own way, because they've been hardwired. He's been hardwired by this guy, and the guy wired him all wrong, intentionally wired him all wrong, so he wouldn't be up to it, so he'd be weak, and that he is trying to be somebody who's not. But it's clear from the very beginning of the show he doesn't have it. And Jesse always said that, but these, it's, I think, part of the reason why he wanted to end the show when he ended it after only 4 seasons, because we could do 2 more seasons of spinning the wheel on who's going to inherit the company now. Maybe it's Greg, but I think Jesse knew no one in the family, the biological family, they don't have it. They're not. That's the whole point. They can't do it. They can't do it because he's made them incapable of doing it.
There is no successor in the family.
No, there's no, and that Jesse said from the very beginning. I remember him saying, sort of, the only plausible one is Tom. And so I kind of, so I kind of have a feeling that it was kind of go towards Tom. That it's the ambitious, milquetoast but quietly cutthroat, ladder climbing suit guy, boxy suit man. He's gonna do fine. He's plausible. You can see, that's the guy you hired for that company. And, someone else who runs a different company, like the Matson character, that guy can be a crazy space alien from the Nordic countries. He can be weird. He can be like Elon. But for heading up ATN, you need a Tom Wambsgans. And so, but I loved writing. Yeah, I loved writing Kendall. In some ways, probably Shiv, Sarah's character, was the hardest to write, or the most challenging to write. Partly because of the richness of the character. She was probably the best of the family members at hiding the football, right? Where you could, she was just about, she'd been outside the family working in politics, and she was culturally savvy and kind of boilerplate liberal on paper enough that you could kind of, if you squint at her, you're like, I think, maybe she's a real person, I'm not, and so you weren't sometimes able to see the very craven, self-interested moves that were guiding her, and so you had to write her slightly more carefully.
Now, I don't think you consider yourself an actor, but you do have one acting credit on Succession. So I wanted to ask you about that experience of appearing in the show.
I technically am in an episode of Succession in a very, 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 very small speaking role that Jesse asked me to do. The character is there's an season 3, episode 3.
I think that's it.
Where Kendall has, in the prior season, he's said, I'm coming after my dad. My dad knew everything about the cruise scandal. I'm coming for him. And he's off on his own doing his sort of social justice crusader thing, or pretending to be a social justice crusader, fighting his dad and pleasing the liberal media. And so he says, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go on one of those shows, like a Daily Show, Sam B type thing. And I'll be funny and cool because I'm funny and cool. And I will go on that show and it'll be great. And then, he kind of sees the episode that the prior week where they're being kind of tough on him, and he starts to get a little nervous. And before the show, he goes to talk to that show's head writer, played by yours truly. And I think Jesse just picked me because he thought, well, you did this job. You were a writer for one of these shows. Close, and you seem like a guy who would be like kind of nervous when a guy like that approaches you, and you're kind of, trying to gingerly handle this crazy person. And so that was it. I mean, I luckily I sort of wrote the scene, so at least I kind of knew the scene. Yeah. And it was mainly just sitting there while Jeremy Strong kind of acted crazy in front of me, and me kind of going, I don't know if that was basically all I do.
Well, you got to act with opposite Jeremy Strong, which is a special experience.
That's right. He got to act, and I got to sort of stand there and react. But yes, I guess that's what acting is.
So now with the rest of our time, I want to do our segment called The First Laugh. So I'm going to run through some questions, starting with the first piece of comedy that you remember making you laugh really hard as a kid growing up.
I don't know if I can remember the first thing. Whatever, it was probably the most unfunny thing in the world. I do remember there was a lot of movies that we watch a lot as a family that we would have on VHS tapes. And so we had a tape that was like, and there would be weird combinations of things. So it would be, there would be like Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, which is kind of a classic comedy. But then there would also be like Abbott and Costello meet Jack and the Beanstalk, which is like a little later in the partnership. And there's when there was one that they weren't doing as well, and they were a little older, they were a little more tired. The budget was not as high. And there's a bit in that movie where they do kind of a Wizard of Oz thing where it's Jack and the Beanstalk. So he gets conked on the head, and when he wakes up, he's in kind of a Jack and the Beanstalk world. And the movie goes from black and white to color. Oh. But when it goes to color, you can suddenly see how cheap the sets are and like how old Lou and Bud are now and how tired they are. But nevertheless, I remember watching that with my brother over and over and over again and laughing. So I must have found something funny about that. So that's the first thing I remember. One of those Abbott and Costello movies were one of the first things I remember laughing a lot at.
What about the first time that you knew that you were funny, that you could make other people laugh?
I don't know if I can remember a time when I felt that necessarily. I mean, Yeah, no, I think look, everyone, my family's funny. My mom's really funny. My brother's really funny, and so we were just always making each other laugh. So I guess probably sensing that they were really funny and I was making them laugh probably gave me some confidence to think that I could be funny.
Now, you already said that you don't remember any Onion headlines you wrote. I was going to ask you the first one that you remember being really proud of that you got in the paper.
I remember
maybe one will come to mind, but
the only one I can remember getting in because it was very early. It's not very funny, but I just remember it because I got it in, and it was kind of a funny setup for a story. It's a good setup, not like a hilarious joke on its own, but you can get a really funny, full of sad, depressing details. And it was murder mystery on train, not so fun in real life. And so it starts like, it's all done sort of, it's basically like if there were a stabbing on the subway.
Yeah.
And sort of like, yeah, but unfortunately it was not with, a jewel encrusted dagger in the cocktail room. The piano player was not a suspect. So it's in fact, it was just a guy who in a hoodie who ran and no one really knew what was happening. And so, yeah, that was kind of the first one I remember clearly. But that's maybe the only one I can still remember off the top of my head.
Do you have a story or memory about the first time you met one of your comedy heroes or someone in the business that you really looked up to and what it was like to meet them for the first time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a way, just meeting those Onion guys is a big deal because I've been such a fan of the books. But I remember we had to do an Onion. I think we were putting in a book, and so we had to do some book event in Austin or something. And there was some cocktail party that we were at, but I went with my friend Seth Reese, who I later wrote the menu with.
Oh, right, yeah.
I wrote with at the Onion, and we didn't know anyone at this big party full of people in Texas. And then the only person that we recognized, and he was also standing around, clearly looking around to see if there were any other comedy writers in the room, was George Meyer. The legendary George Meyer from many things, but he wrote for The Simpsons most famously. He kind of ran The Simpsons room during its best years. He also wrote an amazing kind of early, very famous zine called Army Man, and I think he wrote for Letterman and briefly for SNL. And he was just a guy that was great. And we just saw him there. I think his wife had written a book, and he just went along to free trip to Texas with his wife, but he found himself at this party not knowing anybody. And so we just kind of cornered him, and then he kind of, in a really lovely, nice way, once he heard the Onion, he kind of then cornered us and was asking us all these questions about the Onion and saying his favorite Onion stories. And he was just great. It was like the perfect meeting a hero situation.
Amazing. The last question that we ask on the show: is there a story or memory from your career that makes you laugh now, but really was not funny when it happened?
Yeah, probably a few I can't tell.
Those are the ones we're looking for, the ones you can't tell.
Well, this one's kind of cheating because it definitely was funny in the moment, but a slight feeling of like, and poor Seth. I'm sorry, Seth, if you're listening to this. Seth Reese, my great friend, who I wrote the menu with and who I wrote for many years with the Onion. He's one of my closest pals and writing partners. It was in the Onion room, writer's room, pretty early on when we were both working there. And Seth always had kind of a reputation for he was always talking about his dad, and you'd hear him talking to his dad on the phone, Dad, right? And he was very focused on like whether his dad would approve, and what his dad thought. And there was a day in the writer's room where we were going around the whole room talking about like picking the issue for that week, kind of moving things around. And Joe Randazzo, the editor of the paper, our boss, was kind of putting up things and looking, what about we put this story here? And then Seth at one point said, Dad, could we? And he stopped himself. And he just realized in a room full of comedy writers that he called his boss Dad. And it was one of those things, we'd been kind of made fun of him and his dad for so long. And it was so embarrassing and so funny that I kind of remember almost not laughing because it's like, that's the funniest thing I've ever seen. I can't even laugh. It's so funny and so perfect. And we just kind of moved on with the meeting. But it's just, those are the moments which it's really fun working in the writer's room, but there's a slight feeling of like, at any moment you might do something like accidentally call your boss dad. And unlike other workplaces where they kind of and let it slide, that will haunt you and follow you for the rest of your days.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here, Will. Bugonia is now playing in theaters everywhere. I highly encourage anyone who hasn't seen it yet to check it out because I thought it was fantastic and just really loved the movie. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Matt. These are great questions, great chat. Thanks, buddy.